welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On today's show, I kind of want to go into something I haven't had a chance to go into before and discuss obviously I discuss a lot of different things that go on inside of the lifestyle, different fetishes, different paraphilias. And today I really kind of want to turn my focus towards a real fascinating phenomenon that of something that goes on inside of the lifestyle that different people really kind of thrive on and are quite sexually aroused by. And that's the paraphilia known as Dacryphilia. Now, at its core, it is characterized by sexual arousal derived from witnessing somebody's tears or emotional displays in other people. It really does offer a unique view and window into the complex interplay here between emotion and sexuality. And it sheds a light on the diverse ways in which people really experience and express their desires when we are understanding the range of our human sexuality and going through the different sexual experiences we have. Now, as we go through this episode today, and we're starting to look at this topic, I want to kind of really go into it with an open mind and a willingness to go into the depths of human psychology here. It's not something that I practice even as a sadist because tears don't really drive me. Now, they are fun, but that's not one of the driving. I don't live to see somebody cry. Dacryphiles do. It's that's the point of their arousal. Now, while the concept here of dacryphilia may seem unconventional to some of us, it is essential to recognize that we understand human sexuality is vast and it's layered, and it has all of these range of interests and preferences that people are going to want to explore and expand on. Throughout this show today, I'm going to kind of look at the different factors that contribute to the phenomenon of dacryphilia. I want to look at different aspects and insights from psychology and some other nuances of this fetish. Now, I'm going to I have done some reading on this, and there are some articles out there. There's actually not a lot. It's not heavily studied. There's academic journals here and there about it, but because it's such a nuanced, complex psychological and emotional phenomenon, it's not heavily researched. So let's kind of dive right in here and first understand dacryphilia and what it is. Now, it's often sensationalized in the media, and it's quite misunderstood by the general public, as it refers to this complex sexual preference rooted in the arousal derived by crying or emotional displays in other people. Now, contrary to popular misconceptions here, dacryphilia isn't solely confined to sadistic tendencies or psychological abnormalities, but represents a legitimate aspect of human sexuality. Now, throughout history, dacryphilia has been documented in various cultural contexts, appearing in literature, art, and folklore. Even in ancient societies going back, it was sometimes some things alluded to some ritualistic practices. I'm not 100% sure on that. I didn't have time to go that far back into it. But it is interesting how far back in history we can go, and we can see some of these different aspects coming through. Now, if we look at contemporary portrayals in the media, though, they quite sensationalize what dacryphilia is, and it perpetuates the stereotype and the misconceptions of what it is. Now, despite these misrepresentations, the research that's starting to come out has begun to shed light on the nature of dacryphilia, and it really does reveal the diverse manifestations and motivations behind it. Now, scholars have delved into the psychological underpinnings of dacryphilia, and they explore the factors of empathy, emotional arousal, even the power dynamics that we have within the lifestyle. Now, by examining the historical and cultural roots of dacryphilia, we start to gain insight into the prevalence and significance across different societies and time periods. Now, efforts to define and classify dacryphilia have contributed to more, I guess you could say, a nuanced understanding of the sexual preference. And it really does emphasize the importance of considering individual differences and subjective experiences. When we look at some of the typologies here, recent studies on dacryphilia have kind of sought to explore its underlying mechanisms and typologies, revealing that there are a spectrum of motivations of behaviors among individuals within this sexual fetish. Now, one notable finding that I read is the identification of different types of dacrophiles. These are people who are into dacryphilia, each with distinct preferences and interests. Now, they include individuals with sadistic tendencies who derive pleasure from causing tears in others, as well as the compassionate types who find the arousal in providing comfort and support to somebody in distress. This diverse challenge here really goes against all of the things that we either think or are stereotyped, or even against the grain of the misconceptions that does surround this paraphilia. So, in essence, we're looking at something that's highly complex inside of human sexuality. And the importance of the understanding of this varied expression of a sexual preference allows those who don't necessarily understand why to realize they're not alone. And it's a lot more common than we think. So, to illustrate some of this diversity within this community, it's essential to provide some examples of both the sadistic and the compassionate types. If you have the sadist deriving pleasure from inflicting emotional distress and causing the tears in others, obviously this is going to be done in a consensual power dynamic, or even in a role-playing scenario. Now, the contrast with, as I mentioned before, with the compassionate, offering aid, comfort, or support to someone in distress, both types view their sexual preference as a natural extension of empathy or compassion. Now, by acknowledging these diverse motivations inside of the behaviors, we gain an understanding of what is starting to take place within this community. We understand some of the motivators, why they're a part of it, what drives their fetish, and accept people who are in this community. Obviously, BDSM, or fetish more so, is the vast umbrella term, and we have all of these different fetishes underneath. Now, this is going to be, again, one of these more nuanced sectors of the fetish community where there's not that many people who are into it. They're starting to explore it, and they're wanting to test their limits around it. It's really something, as long as the community understands that, there's no harm, there's obviously consensual arrangements going on, that this is something that people find true pleasure in. I want to kind of go through a little bit more of a deeper dive, if you will, inside of these archetypes or types of the dacrophiles. Now, why is there the array? That's something that's still kind of being looked at. It's not clearly understood. It does sound, oh, well, hey, Chris, I get it. We're taking care of somebody. They're crying. It makes us sexually aroused. We're inflicting the pain. Yeah, that's all there. Well, it typically goes deeper than that. Now, if we look at the world of dacryphilia and understand what the motivators and preferences among these different types, is where it kind of gets interesting. Now, we know that there is, at the minimum, 3 types. And first, we're looking at the compassionate, right? I've mentioned this before. They're driven by this innate empathy and compassion. They become more and more aroused. In one study, it was 6 women, 2 men, all in between the ages of 20 and 25, on a scale of 1 to 10, kind of a rating scale to figure out where their sexual arousal was going. Most of them are peaking between levels 7 to 9, when they witnessed a partner that was having some sort of an emotional crisis, and they were trying to be there for them, or a friend, and they were finding and describing that their sexual arousal levels went up. And the more they saw tears, and this was somehow this natural extension of their own compassion to help and nurture these people get through this moment. These intertwining acts, intermixed with their kindness and feelings, also brought on simultaneously for them thoughts and feelings of intimacy and arousal. Now, the study doesn't go on to say too much about whether or not they were engaging. None of these studies do, if they end up engaging or acting on these feelings of arousal. But on the other side, we go to the other end of the spectrum where we're talking about the dominant and submissive dacryphiles. And these are the people specifically drawn to the power dynamics and control. And we already understand that from being within the community. Now, typically they do this in a consensual role play scenario, or may set up a scene like a heavy interrogation, maybe even a heavy degradation scene where they're really kind of pushing and testing these limits between each other. And the tears serve for them as a conduit of expressing and navigating the power dynamic itself within the intimacy of their relationship. And that's their motivator. It's not going to be every time. They don't need tears every time to get to these levels. I want to make that perfectly clear. But for them, it does heighten their sexual promiscuity, if you will. Now, there is another type that I didn't mention before. There are these dacryphiles that are fascinated by specific features exhibited during crying, such as the protruding bottom lip, or the quivering top lip, the sniffling of the nose. The visual stimuli here associated with the emotional distress evoke strong emotional and sexual responses in certain people, and they highlight the unique nature of their sexual preference. Now, the group study that I read on this was 32 or 33 different individuals. The age ranges from about 21 to 33, 32, and it was evenly split. I think there was actually more women than men, but the ones that I identified here, it was exactly what it was bringing on. The men almost all simultaneously had answered yes as they were watching their partner cry, watching the different reactions on their face. The eyes grow big and water and start to well over. This was massive arousal for them, causing them to engorge. And for the females, they started noticing if they were, regardless of who they were with, which is more interesting because they were responding they had mentioned in their study response that they were having unnatural or inappropriate thoughts at times, not about the person. So it didn't necessarily have to be about a romantic partner, but they were having inappropriate arousal responses given certain situations. Like it was a friend of theirs crying over something. One person had noted that it was her best friend saying to her, like her boyfriend had broken up. And as she kept telling the story and crying and sobbing more, she noticed first the arousal in her nipple region. And then from there, she started feeling very uncomfortable as she noticed she was gaining, her sexual arousal levels were increasing watching her friend cry, eventually excusing herself and leaving because she felt ashamed at what was going on and didn't fully understand it. This is one of these things that really, I think, because it's not necessarily controllable, paraphilias, so you all understand, there's not a cure for paraphilia. There's management and there's coping techniques that people can employ, medications that they can put on, but there's not a way to cure paraphilias. I think a lot of people think you can go to psychotherapist or a psychologist or a counselor or psychiatrist or something, and we talk it out and then we're done. No, it's got to be managed. Something like this can also be based all around compulsion. If the compulsion isn't satiated enough, they may seek out this until their compulsion is satiated. They may instigate fights and try to, be around people that are upset. So there's a lot of different factors that go on into this. As we're starting to look at that, which is a really good kind of segue into this next part, if we're looking at this psychological underpinning here of the exploration here of Dacryphilia, there's a lot of different factors, including obviously the dynamics, the empathy, even classical conditioning. Now, if we're looking at the dominant submissive Dacryphiles power dynamics here, we understand that's going to be the central role of the sexual experience, probably with more of a sadistic tendency as they go through the scene and within the context of that emotional expression, having it charged so they can reach that level of arousal for one partner or another. When we're looking at the compassionate, we're looking at the significant factor here is going to be empathy for them. That derives their arousal from providing comfort and support to some of those in distress. And the connection here between empathy and sexual arousal really does underscore this complex point between their emotional and psychosexual experiences within their community. Because how can you genuinely be there for someone if you're actually only there because you want to be sexually aroused? Or more so, how can you be there for anyone in a capacity if they understand that you're a Dacryphile in the first place, and they may think that because they're crying or they need to talk to you or vent to you about a bad day or whatever the situation may be, if anything, all it's going to do is arouse you. That can put kind of a wrench in the works. Now, if we're looking at classical conditioning here, it may influence Dacryphiles' interests. And as individuals develop associations between the visual stimulus associated with the emotional distress and the sexual arousal, all of these psychological factors start to give us insight into the nature of the Dacryphiles themselves and the manifestations of the broader spectrum of human sexuality. But the one thing that I want to make sure that we all understand that this isn't judgment here. This isn't somebody saying this is right or this is wrong. This is for people to start understanding that there are other fetishes out there that we enjoy and we're a part of. There's nothing wrong with this. If you're doing it to inflict harm and there's intention, yes, then we're doing something wrong. So that's kind of we need to look at the broader implications with inside of our community. So if we're looking at that in these contexts here where power dynamics and these intense emotions we already understand are integral, ensuring that we have informed and enthusiastic consent is going to be paramount. Now, we don't want to put ourselves in a way where we're engaging in something that there's no communication, we haven't respected anybody's boundaries, and we're going to be violating their trust and understanding just to inflict emotional distress so we can satiate that sexual desire. We're not then at that point being safe. But if we want to engage with somebody and we're pushing them into this level, we're going to have to be discussing that. And that can be a very touchy subject to kind of go into with a potential partner. We have to understand that we need to be in a space where we're feeling supportive, that it's non-judgmental, and we are clear to have exploration and expression. But that doesn't just is not just for the Dacryphiles. That's going to be with the person that they're exploring it with. And the intersection here between our practices and the lifestyle and Dacryphilia itself really does go to the intricate dynamics of what's at the core of the lifestyle itself. We have to go beyond the power exchange if we are I mean, depending on the type archetype you are, if inside of the Dacryphilia community, I would think that the power dynamics are going to be quite different and quite riveting. But if you don't admit, I think, to your partner, and you're always constantly driving, especially if you're a dominant, driving your submissive to cry, they may misconstrue your intentions to satiate your sexual desires, where they're thinking you are just being cruel for the sake of being cruel, and they may not want to stay around. We understand all of these things manifest differently. And these scenarios, especially when it comes to Dacryphilia, are going to range differently how their relationships are structured. We have to take all of this into account. And it seems like a lot when we're managing these things. It's why I mentioned there's nothing wrong with this. This doesn't seem to rate particularly high. It only gets obviously dangerous if it's starting to interfere with your work or your relationships on some level. For that, you need to talk to somebody who specializes in this paraphilia or sexual paraphilias. But let's kind of cover some of the misconceptions and maybe even the stereotypes here. One thing we often see is the media representations sensationalize or even misrepresent Dacryphilia. They perpetuate this harmful stereotype, which then, as we know, kind of contributes to a stigma. If we look against these misconceptions and promote accurate portrayals, individuals with different sexual preferences can feel affirmed and accepted. I'm not saying we need to go out there and make a new movie like 50 Shades of Stupid and make it all about Dacryphilia. But if we, tell people, or there is a movie that's a little bit more sexually explicit, that's covering some things in the lifestyle, like the movie The Secretary, where they obviously covered multiple themes there. If in that you incorporated this and you made people understand that it was okay and normalized it, well, that probably allows people to better understand it. The problem is between normalizing and sensationalize something, and then also how do we find the barrier so it doesn't cause harm. These are all things that we as a community, as we discuss these things, it's very important for us to have these conversations. And we can't just ostracize some people because we don't understand something. Now, again, research and education here, they're quite scant. They really are. Even when I look on social media, if I've looked up anything on X or Instagram, doesn't really have a lot. Even the fetish communities of like fetish.com or FetLife, there are some groups dedicated to it, and there are some members in those groups, but they're not either overly active or there's not a lot of overrepresentation. I think it's one of these things because people don't know how to navigate these feelings. They may get nervous in wanting to explore something, and they might, have some self-degradation. Why are you into this? What's wrong with you? We're chastising ourselves. One thing you can do is if you get involved with your local community first, that, as far as you're maybe a local Dacryphilia community, reach out. You can actually reach out to some universities and find out if they have researchers there that do sexual health based studies, and it further contributes to what we do to understand human nature better. If we had more research on it, and I can tell you right now, the majority of the research on this paraphilia has only been done over a little less than the last 20 years. It's really not that well studied. So if you're out there, you're listening, this is something you're into, hey, help advance science. Why not? Our community, we've used science to contribute to our community. We could give back a little bit, right? Now, it's clear that this just isn't about getting turned on by tears. It really is about something deeper, and it's something that taps into our emotions, our desires, our relationships to our core. I'm hoping today that you see this diverse and complex aspect of how deep our human sexuality can actually go. And if we're truly on a path towards sexual liberation and acceptance, we have to learn to keep an open mind and a compassionate heart about things that we're not necessarily driven to or interested in or even know about. Because that's the vastness of the human experience. There's a beauty in embracing the differences that make each of us wonderfully unique. And when I was looking into this today, I remember this quote from Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, and they remarked and reflected on this therapeutic nature of tears. And the quote said this: "There is a sacredness in tears. They are not the mark of weakness, but of power. They speak more eloquently than 10,000 tongues. They are the messengers of overwhelming grief, of deep contrition and unspeakable love." And I couldn't think, when I came across this quote, it really was quite fitting for this today. And how it really does wrap up, I'm guessing, what a dacryphile must feel. I could be wrong. I don't know. I've never really met one or talked to one. But with that said, my question I'm going to leave you all with today is, what aspects of dacryphilia do you find maybe intriguing or fascinating, and how do these interests contribute to your own understanding of human sexuality if you are a part of this community? I'd really like to know. I'd like to get some feedback on this. Really like to kind of deeper dive into this discussion. I want to give you all some updates. So there's been a problem with my print book. I got back from my publishers that there's a problem with the headers and the alignments. I'm going through that right now, so there is going to be a delay. I'm sorry. I know I keep getting asked. It seems like forever, and I feel like I'm not getting it done. Please all understand I'm a one-man operation, and sometimes there's not enough time. Which may eventually in the future, I might be looking for a service sub PA if somebody's maybe interested in wanting to help me get a little bit more organized and do some things. Second, I had mentioned I'm starting a new podcast. I want to go a little bit further into that. I'm not ready yet to reveal the nature or the name of my show, but I am going to be venturing into true crime. And it might seem odd, but based on what I do, but we are going to be doing some true crime and lifestyle. That's where I'm going to focus, and still building it out, but that's a little bit more for you. I have the name, not going to reveal it just yet. You guys have to wait another week or two. I was trying to get that launched by the end of the month, but I'm trying to find, I've got a graphic artist. I got to go and have a conversation with them. I want to get the logo done for the show. So there's a lot going on. Now, if this is the first time you're listening to me today, please like, subscribe, follow me on Spotify. If you are following me on the Spotify app, please rate me 5 stars if you like this show, you like my other episodes. It allows me to keep the show free for now. It allows others to keep finding this show. If you can keep recommending it, passing it on, I would really appreciate it. Really does help me out. It helps me keep this going forward. So let me know today what you think about the show in the comment section when I put this up here. Let me know what you think about this. If you're into this fetish, let me know more about it. Let me know what your thoughts are on this whole thing. It's really quite something fascinating. I think something we can really take away from for a lot of us. With that said, until next time, everybody, be safe, stay tuned.